All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first informational webinar for Labvanced. We are super excited for this event, and we'd also like to mention that you should definitely stay tuned until the end for a special opportunity that we're going to present. But we're really excited to walk you through our platform and show you what Labvanced has to offer. So our agenda for today on our webinar is we're going to do some introductions. I'd like to introduce you to some members of our company. I'm going to walk you through our platform very briefly. We're going to build a sample study together, and then we have about half an hour at the end for a question and answer session. And feel free to ask us anything, and if we can't answer it on the webinar, we would love to chat with you in our support chat. So to start, I'd like to welcome Casper and Holger, and I'm going to add them now to introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Casper. I'm one of the co-founders of the company. And yeah, it's really, really nice to have this event. Thank you, Adeline, really for arranging all of this. Of course, your idea, and I think it's really, really great to have this. Yeah, it's our first webinar, and I think this is also really a test for just seeing whether all the tech is working. We're streaming live to 2 platforms. That's really, or 3 platforms. That's really amazing. And yeah, I mean, if everything works out and there's continued interest in this, we will have more specialized sessions for topics like eye tracking or other topics of interest. And yeah, I'm really, really excited to for the next 1 hour, 1.5 hours. Thank you, Adeline.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Holger Finger. I'm another co-founder of Labvanced. My role in the development is more, or in the company is more CTO, so I'm more responsible for technical things and software architecture. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to a nice presentation. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. And my name is Adeline. I am in charge of some of the educational materials, so some of our YouTube videos, and I also help with our text-based documentation. And I also have Rachel is in the audience helping us out with some of our questions. So feel free to say hi in the chat. All right, so we're going to start with a walkthrough of our platform, and then I'm actually going to take you through building a sample study. And the idea here is that maybe you can watch both at once, but you can listen to me, watch what I'm doing, and also try it on your own account to see how the platform is working for you. This is going to be really great information for new users and a nice refresher for our experienced users, because I'm going to showcase some features that you may not have used yet. And if there's anything in this webinar that you'd like more information about or that I didn't cover, you can see our YouTube videos or our text documentation, because we have lots of great information there. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to our platform here. So this is the Labvanced platform. As you can see, we've got lots of different tabs going on over here, so I'd like to quickly walk you through each one. The first tab up here is our dashboard. Here you can see any studies you've been invited to, any recording sessions you've done, experiments that you've built, and new experiments in our library. This is also super helpful just to kind of give you an overview of your own account. In the My Studies tab, this is probably the tab you'll be using the most. This is where you can create a new study or import an existing study, and you can also organize all of your studies into folders. I have tons of folders because that's how I like to organize mine, but you can also just have them listed here. In the Shared Studies tab, if you're on a lab account, you can see any studies that have been shared with you by your lab members. The Profile tab shows your studies that have been published, as well as your information. Files is where you can see any files that you've uploaded to use in studies. As you can see, I've got lots of images here that I'm going to be using throughout the webinar. Feel free to just add a blank image object or upload an image from your own computer. The Library is the Public tab. As you can see, it takes a minute because we've got lots of really great studies here that you can import and use as templates. So here you can see lots of templates that we've built, and these are super helpful if, say, you want to build a very specific study, but you're not quite sure how to get started. Go ahead and download one of our templates and change it to fit your needs. We also have feature demos, which is where you can scroll through and see, maybe you just want to learn more about the factor tree. Participating in this study is kind of an instructional way of learning about the factor tree. In the My Account tab, you can see all of your information, such as like what license you're on, how much space you have left, and any orders like crowdsourcing that you've done. So that's kind of a brief overview of our screens here. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the My Studies tab, and I'd like to go ahead and get started building our webinar study. So if you'd like, go ahead and open Labvanced in a different tab or just watch and follow along, and we can build it together. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click New Study, and I'm going to call this just Webinar Study. Okay, as you can see, there's lots of settings here that we can adjust. I'm going to leave everything in these default settings, but you can go ahead and change them as you wish. I would like to start with canvas frames, and all of my trials are going to be active. So once I've named my study, adjusted all my settings, I can click OK. All right, so here's the default screen. This is everything you're going to get when you first create a new study. Just a brief recap here for those of you who are new users. Tasks are the smallest instances. That's where you put all of your content for your experiment. Tasks get assigned to blocks, which is how you can organize different chunks of like trials. Blocks get assigned to sessions, and sessions to groups. To create a longitudinal study, which we have more information about in our documentation, you just create multiple sessions for a group. Multi-group groups can also be used for randomization to assign subjects to different conditions. For now, I'm just going to leave everything as default, and let's get started with our first task. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename it, and I'm just going to call it Intro. So this sample study that we're building together is kind of a combination of things. The intro task is going to be getting to know you. So questions about what research you like to do, have you used Labvanced before? And then the next couple tasks are going to be feature demos, essentially. So let's go ahead and click this pen icon and click Edit here. This is our default screen. This is the first thing you're going to see. Please read this carefully because it's very great information. I'm going to go ahead and delete this instructions though, because I've read it a few times. But we also have this listed in our documentation, and it's in our YouTube videos as well. So the first thing I want to do to create this introduction task is I want to add a text object that says welcome to the experiment, because this is the first thing my participant is going to see. You can double click in the text object to edit it. And I'm just going to type welcome to the experiment. The cool thing here is that this functions the same way as a normal word processor. So you can highlight things, center them, left, right align. You can also change the font, and you can change the color. So I'm going to set mine to purple. Canvas frames are great because you can arrange them however you'd like. You can put objects wherever, but if you need things to be aligned, you can turn on the grid here and see everything lined up. So the next thing I want to do is I want to add a selection object. And this is going to be really interesting for our purposes. So I'm going to go to this question various category at the end, and I'm going to add this selection object. For a lot of our objects, when you add them, you have to choose a variable name because they're going to be recorded as a variable. So for this one, I'm going to call this role. Okay. Perfect. I'm going to pop this here. As you can see, associated with this selection object is a question. Now, since this is a getting to know you task, I'd like to know what your role is. So are you a student? Are you a professor? Are you an independent researcher? That's the kind of question I'm adding today. So here in this question, I'm going to say, choose your role. Make sure I spelled everything right. All right, make it a little bit bigger. Perfect. Now, to edit this, we're going to go over here into the Object Properties window, which automatically opens when you add this object. And I'm actually going to scroll all the way down here to my list. We do have predefined selection lists like countries, but I'm going to go ahead and create this manually. So the first thing I'm going to add is student. So I'm going to type it in the box here, click the plus to add it. As you can see, the text entry is what the participant is going to see. The variable value is what's going to get recorded in the experiment. So in your data output, if someone selects student, you'll see student. And you can change this too. So let's say you are doing a selection object, but some of your answers are correct and some are incorrect. You can list all your answers here and then code them for yourself as correct versus incorrect. So now I'm going to add some more options here. So let's add professor. Let's add postdoc. Let's add independent. Perfect. So here's my 4 options here. We'll add a 5th one. We'll just do other. Great. So now when I come over here and click this arrow, I see all of the options that I just added. Does that make sense to everyone? Is that going pretty well? Okay, perfect. Not seeing any questions in the chat, so I'm assuming we're doing well. The other thing in this tab that you can check is that we have the variable set to string. If we had it set to numeric, the dropdown would show numbers. So we just want to make sure it's string for our purposes. All right, everything looks good here. I'm going to go ahead and click save. Click save multiple times. It's very helpful. The next thing I'm going to add to this frame is a button object. And I'd like the button to move us from this frame to the next frame. Part of the logic of Labvanced is that there's lots of different objects and events that help move you through the experiment in dynamic ways. And I'll show you that a little bit later. But the first thing is just a simple button that moves you to the next frame. So I'm actually going to edit the title of the button the same way we edit a text object by double clicking, and we get this editor. And I just want it to say next. The cool thing about buttons is you can actually change their color. So let's say I want my button to be this like blue-purple color. And then when I hover over it, it turns green. So then your participant knows that they're clicking that specific button. Super helpful for experiments where you have, say, like 6 buttons on one frame, and you want them to be very clear about which one they're clicking. Perfect. So we have this button, but it doesn't do anything yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an event. It's going to be a frame event, and I'm going to title it just next frame. Okay. For trigger, I'm going to click here. Since I want people to click on the button to move them to the next frame, it's a user input mouse trigger. You see how I did that dragging across here? Perfect. So once we've added our mouse trigger, we click add target, and I want it to be this button here. You can name your buttons too. I highly recommend if you have more than 1 button per frame, definitely name them. You can click next here. And our action is going to be a jump action because we want the experiment to move in some way. So I'm going to scroll over to jump 2, and it's very simply just next frame. Notice when I click one of these options here, when I click next frame, it says check required answers before. Just make sure that everything has been worked through. And I click finish. So that's probably our simplest event here, is just moving you to the next frame via a button press. So now my next frame here, I'm going to add another canvas frame. And on this frame, let's say I want people to input an answer. So I'm actually going to add an input object. And this one I'm going to call interest. On this frame, I'm going to ask a question, what is your research interest? So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Double click here. What is your research interest? Perfect. And this can be area of interest, however you'd like to word it that makes most sense for you. Now, while this is still selected, let's go into the object properties and make sure that this is exactly set how we'd like it. Right here. So this is super important to check the properties of your objects. If you notice, when I added this input object, the default input type is number. I actually want to change this to text because I want people to type in this box what their research interest is. So now, looking at the variable associated, I see that it says string, and there's these little letters here. Perfect. And that's exactly what I want. All right, so let's do a different kind of event here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose an event that when this question is answered, it's going to jump the participant to the next task. So we have 2 questions in this task. What's your role? And what's your research interest? So my next event here is going to be another frame event. We're going to call this one next task. Because instead of just jumping to another frame in the same task, we're actually going to start building a new task. So my next task, also adding descriptions is super helpful, but for this, you know what I'm talking about. Our trigger is actually going to be a variable value change. Okay? So when the value of interest, do you see how that happened there? when I click add a variable, it pops up with all the variables I have in this task. So when I'm adding this variable interest, when that changes, I want it to jump the participant to the next task. There's also another way you can do this, and I'd like to show you that now. I'm actually going to add to this question, press enter when finished. I'm going to show you how that works as well. So now we've changed the parameters just a little bit, and I'm going to show you how to do that event. So same kind of thing. Next task. The trigger now is going to be a user input, enter on input. So there's two ways to move people to the next task or to the next frame whenever a variable is slightly changed. The first one is as soon as they select a value, they get moved. The second one is when they hit enter on that variable. Does that make sense to everyone? Is that looking pretty good? Okay, perfect. So then the last thing we have to do is add the action that happens as a result of the trigger. And that's going to be another jump action, this time to the next task. And now I can manually select check required answers before, but I don't have to, but I will. Perfect. All right, so there's our first task already. Simple, quick introduction task, just saying who's watching and what are you interested in, and click save. Let's go back. I'm clicking the study design tab up here to go back to my home screen. If you notice, once I'm in editing mode of a study, I get all of these new tabs here. I have a very extensive YouTube video about these tabs, so please feel free to check that out. For now, we're just going to be using the study design tab for the remainder of the webinar. So let's add another task. And this one is going to be a feedback task. And this is super exciting because there's lots of different ways you can show participants what they've responded to your experiment and if they were correct or not. So let's click New Task. This one is automatically prompted to be renamed. So I'm going to name this one Feedback. Okay, now quickly before we start editing, if you notice, I added a task here. It does not automatically get assigned to a block. So what we need to do is we need to add that task to this block. Any tasks that are not assigned to blocks will not be conducted in the experiment. Any blocks not assigned to sessions will not be conducted. If you see where I'm going with this, everything has to be assigned all the way across. Okay? Perfect. So let's go ahead and edit this feedback task. Same thing, we get these instructions right away. Please read them before you delete them. Perfect. So for this feedback task, I'm going to be showing you two different ways of presenting feedback. And I'm going to be doing this by using two different trial groups. Again, very extensive YouTube videos about this. But essentially, if you have tasks that are very, very similar, or trials that are very similar, but just different enough that they can't be put together as levels, you can use different trial groups too. And you're still grouping them in the same task, but they're different trial groups, so they can be slightly different. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and add a multiple choice element. I'm immediately prompted to name my variable. This one is going to be sky color. Okay. As you can see, this is kind of a big mix of lots of different features of Labvanced. So if you'd like to stick to a theme, go for it, please do. I have some space-themed questions, but you can stick to whatever theme you'd like. So my question for this is going to be, what color is the sky? And before you all shout blue, my sky is gray today, so that's why we're providing lots of different options for people. All right, so I have my sky color question. Scrolling down here, make sure that it says string, perfect. And I can start editing my options here. Something to note, if I edit this first option, let's say I type blue as my first option. Looking over here at my Object Properties tab, the variable value for entry 1 does not automatically change to what I typed here. So what I'm typing here is what the participant is seeing. What's happening over in this variable value box is what the experiment is recording. So make sure that your options match, okay? So every time you edit one of these options, also edit the variable value. So for this section option, let's do gray, because that's what's happening over here by me. And let's add another option using this plus icon. This one's going to be, let's say pink for like a pretty sunset. It's kind of nice. Sunset or sunrise, I suppose, depending on where you are in the world. All right, awesome. So I have my 3 options. Something else to notice here. Gray is automatically selected, and we don't want that to happen. So if we go up here to this Variables tab, click on our sky color variable, all you have to do is go to the Start Value box and erase it. And now nothing is selected. All right, perfect. This is more important for, let's say you're recording the same variable multiple times, but you want it to maybe be different every time. So you can do it that way, or you don't have to select it. For events, we're actually going to set up 2 events here. So first, I'm going to add another canvas frame, and I'd like to add a display text object. Since this is the feedback task, I'd like to provide feedback on what their answer was here. Because there's no correct answer on what color is the sky, I'm just going to report feedback on what they said that their answer was. So I'm just going to type, your answer was, and then colon here. To add the variable that they selected as their answer, I'm clicking this red Variables tab. I'm going to hit Global Variables, and I see that there's nothing here, and nothing for local variables. So what I'm going to do is actually go back to this frame, go to this Variables tab, click on my sky color variable, and make sure that I've selected View in Global List. This is a super good strategy, I think, for most of your variables so that you can access them later. This also simplifies your experimental design because you can reuse variables on multiple frames or tasks. So now that this is going to be viewed in the global list, when I come back here to use this red button to add my variable, clicking on Global Variables, it's right here. So I just click that and then click OK. So now, when my participant selects the sky color, that next frame is going to say your answer was gray, blue, or pink. Okay. However, we do need an event to get us to this next frame. So let's add our event here. And this one is going to be also next frame. The trigger is going to be that variable value change that I told you about earlier. Right? So as soon as sky color changes, it's going to jump us to the next frame. And click Finish. Did that make sense to everyone? Or was that too quick? That seem okay? All right, looks good. Okay, so then we're going to jump to this next frame. And then I want this one to just have a duration of, say, like 3 seconds. And I can do that by coming down into frame settings and changing my duration to 3000 milliseconds. I can also hide the mouse. So if I think that showing the mouse to the participant is going to be distracting, or if maybe they're going to try and click on something, I can just hide the mouse for that frame. And if you look, those settings don't apply to this first frame. So let's click Save. Let's add our second trial group here, and I'm going to show you how to do correct versus incorrect responses. So when you're editing the second trial group, make sure that trial group 2 is selected, because if trial group 1 is still selected, you'll be editing what you've already done. With trial group 2 selected, it's almost like we're starting new, like a clean slate, which is why we get this instructions object again, but we're still in the same task. So let's add another multiple choice object. And this was going to be moons. These are just fun little questions to show you how to use all of our different features here. So my question here is, how many moons does Jupiter have? You can go ahead and Google the answer. It's okay. My first option is going to be 79. My second option is going to be 53. And then I'd like to add a third option, which is going to be 20. Okay, perfect. So I have my answers here. That's what the participant is going to see. But remember, down here in variable value, that's what my experiment's going to record. So what I'd like to do is code these as correct or incorrect. So option 1 is correct. I Googled it, it's okay. So I'm going to name this variable as correct. and then name these other two variables incorrect. Of course, if you'd like to know exactly which one your participant picked, you would just have the variable value match with the numbers here. But for me, I just want to know if they were correct versus incorrect. So I've coded them now as correct, incorrect, incorrect. And let's check our variables tab and make sure, yep, the start value is blank, which means nothing has been automatically selected. And I'd like to view this one in global list as well and only see the final value. So let's click save. Let's add our second canvas frame with our same text object. And this is going to be the same thing we did before. Your answer was, this time I'm not adding the colon because it's actually going to read very smoothly. It'll either say your answer was correct or your answer was incorrect because that's how I coded my variables. So let's add our variable moons and click OK. Same thing, give it a duration of 3000 milliseconds and hide the mouse. Going back to this frame, we just have to add that event that moves us to the next frame. Trigger again is going to be that variable value changed. Please let me know if I'm going too fast. Our variable is moons. Click next. And our action is going to be jump to next frame. And click finish. And then click save. Definitely click save often. Now what we can do is we can do a test run of just this task, which is super helpful if you've just coded a bunch of variables and you're not sure if they're all going to fit together. Clicking this little play button up here opens another window. And we can click start. All right, so here's our first question. For me, I'm answering gray, and it shows me my answer for 3 seconds. And then let's pick an incorrect one. Perfect. So it seems like everything is working just the way we wanted it to. So that task is done. So let's go back to our study design tab and let's add another task. This one is going to be a reaction time task. I'm just going to call it reaction time. The reason I'm doing reaction time and feedback separately is because reaction time is often measured across experiments, so I wanted to give it some special time here. All right, can delete our instructions. For my reaction time task, what I'm doing is I'm presenting an image and I'm asking the participant to just click on the image as fast as they can. So with trial group 1 selected, I'm going to go ahead and add an image to the middle of my frame, add a display text object for the instructions, and I'm just going to type, click the image. We'll say as fast as possible. Perfect. Say as slowly as possible, however you'd like to measure. That'd be an interesting reaction time to studies if you said click it as slowly as possible to see if people get confused and try to click it super fast. Okay, perfect. So this is all set up. Let's add a second frame with our display text object. And this was going to say the reaction time, or we can just say speed. We can just say your speed was blank, or your speed in milliseconds. Perfect. We'll add our variable in a second once we've set all that up. Okay, so let's set up our images and let's set up our events. For this task, I'm actually going to have 4 trials, so I can come down to this trial and condition window and change this number to 4. Awesome. Go back up here, make sure you're selecting trial group 1, and let's put our images into the experiment. Click on the image to highlight it, scroll down in the Object Properties menu, and let's click this little file folder to select our images. As you can see, a ton of things pop up. This is everything that I've added to my experiments. You may have different files, you may have no files. If you don't have any files here, or if the files you want haven't been added yet, just click this Upload File button here, and then you can select from your computer's menu. For me, I'm going to pick a couple of the images that I already have added to my experiment. Okay, Now that I've selected multiple images, I get this little spreadsheet icon instead of the OK button. Go ahead and click the spreadsheet. Now, down in this trials and conditions window, I've already changed the number of trials to 4. So I'm going to assign my files to existing trials. If you haven't created the number of trials you want, you can click create as many trials as files selected, or create a new trial for each selected file. Whichever works for you. I'm going to choose this first option. So I'm clicking next. Now you come to this assigning window. You can either drag and drop, or you can click auto assign, whichever one makes sense. You may have your files in a different order than you want them presented, in which case the drag and drop makes more sense. Once they're there, click confirm. And coming down here, I can now see all of my images. Click this little arrow next to the 1, and I can see that each trial is a different image. Does that make sense to everyone? Adding the files and then they get added to these trials here. Sometimes this window is a little bit hidden, so it helps to see that you can actually edit all of these trials. All right, there seem to be no questions, so that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and select our trial group 1 again. If you notice, it goes blank, and that's because this is the default trial here. So I'm just editing all of them at once, but if I make any major changes, it does apply to all of them. So when you're putting your images in, just be careful about that. Don't change anything on the default trial once you've added all your images. So I'm going to add an event. It's a frame event, and this is going to be just RT, because it's going to record my reaction time. Trigger type is going to be a user input. It's a mouse trigger because I want them to click the image. Okay? So the trigger is clicking on that image. Next, I'm actually going to add 2 actions here. So my first action is going to be to set or record a variable, right? Because we want to record reaction time as a variable. So we're going to click this button. This is to select a variable. Notice we don't have any reaction time variables, so we have to create a new one. We're just going to call it RT for reaction time. My data type is going to be numeric. Everything else can pretty much stay the same. I can just leave all of this. Click OK, and our new variable appears right here. Clicking the pen icon shows what that variable should be recorded as. So since I set it as a mouse trigger on that image, I just go over to trigger mouse and scroll down to time from frame onset. So now reaction time is going to be the time from frame onset that the image was clicked. Does that make sense how everything kind of relates back? This is our event logic here that I'm showcasing. Does that look pretty good? Okay, perfect. The next action that I want to do is to jump to the next frame. So all we do is add that same jump action we've been using, jump to next frame, and click finish. Okay, and our event shows up here in the events tab. The last thing we have to do is go back to this text box that we set up and just add our variable here. Here's RT, and click OK. And then we click save, because you should always click save. All right, that looks pretty good. Last thing, when you have multiple trials, or just in general, definitely check out this randomization menu. This is super important. Right now, all of my trials are set to random. So if you look in simulation of trial sequence, this shows what a potential subject would see. If I keep hitting refresh, you notice how the numbers change order. If I want everything to be in the order that I set it, just click Fixed by Design, and then no matter how many times I hit refresh, everyone sees them in the same order. I'm going to leave them as random, but this is something super important to know, especially if you have multiple trials. So let's click Save. All right. That looks pretty good. Let's do a test run here. All right, perfect. Something I forgot to do, but it's super important. If you notice, this frame is not going away. So let's hit Escape, and let's go back to our editing here. What we forgot to do was to set a duration here for this reaction time frame. So let's go back, set our duration. Let's do 2 milliseconds this time, and we'll hide the mouse again. These feedback frames are really great because they also kind of serve as fixation frames. If you've ever used a fixation cross in your experiment, it kind of serves to break up your trials and give your participant a little bit of a breather. these are great because now they're distracted, like, oh, okay, that was my reaction time, cool. And then the next image flashes. So very nice. All right, so let's check all of our events again. Yep, go to next frame, durations 2, perfect. Click save again. Let's do our second trial run here. Make sure everything does work. Perfect. Go really slowly this time. All right, awesome. So our trial seems to be working just fine. Don't forget to do those events. They do kind of sneak up on you. All right, so that task is done. Everyone good with reaction time? Does that seem pretty good? There's lots of different ways to use it, lots of different ways to have events record it. All right. Again, don't forget, we have to add this reaction time task to our block. I can also break up these blocks. I can put these experimental tasks in their own block and leave the intro task alone. It's up to you, however you'd like to do it. All right, click save on this big button here, and let's add another task. This one I'm super excited for because it's a feature that I don't think a lot of people use. So I'm going to call it sorting. All right, read the instructions and then delete them. Okay, so something that I feel like not a lot of users do is add a sorting object. So I'm just going to call this sort1. This object is super cool because you're presented with a bunch of different elements and you can actually reorder them on the frame as a form of a response. So I think this is super cool applications in maybe personality research with like optimistic versus pessimistic or egocentric versus allocentric spatial research. Basically seeing how people think. Do they want to order things from best to worst or worst to best? That sort of thing. So I'm going to stick with my space theme. And I'm going to add a question here that's actually going to be different for each trial. So let's add my elements first. So with this object selected, scroll all the way down, and let's change the names of my elements here. So ID1, I'm going to add moon. ID2 is going to be Earth. And ID3 is going to be sun. Okay, and let's actually add another one. Let's add a planet. Perfect. Okay, so now I have my 4 options. Let's make this object a little bit bigger so we can see our 4th element here. And remember, these are the variables that are being recorded, so we actually have to change them here and make sure that they match what's in that little box. So let's go through and do this together. If you notice when I click on each one, I get that same text editor, which is super helpful. Okay, awesome. So there's my sorting task. I'm actually going to increase the number of trials to 3. And by clicking on this arrow here, I can edit each of them individually while they still maintain the same elements. So it's the same variables, just different for each trial. So my question for the first trial is going to be order by size. Start with an easy question. Pop that in the center. My second trial, if you see it goes back to your question, so I can edit these individually, is going to be order by distance. I'm intentionally leaving that one vague. Okay, and my third trial is order by brightness. And I'm aware that these objects, except the sun, don't have their own inherent brightness, but that's kind of part of the ambiguity of the question. Okay, perfect. So I have my questions here. And let's go ahead and add a different question to the frame, but I'm going to show you how we're going to do this really interestingly. So we're actually going to add a multiple choice element. This one's going to be called order. And this one, again, is going to be different for each of the trials because it's going to be kind of that psychology aspect. So remember to edit it in the default group just to add it to the frame. Once it's where you want it, then go into the individual trials, and we're going to change it for each. So for this one, our multiple choice is going to be I ordered by ... Our first option, because this is the size question, is smallest to largest. The second option is largest to smallest. Okay, great. And remember, we have to come down here and change our variable values because it's going to be different than what the participant sees. So I'm just going to call this one small to large, and the second one large to small. Perfect. All right, those are my variable values there. Make sure everything says text. Looks good. Okay. For my second question, same thing. I ordered by ... First option is going to be distance from Earth. And the second one is going to be distance from the sun. See how that's starting to come into that psychology, like me-centered versus the universe-centered view? So lots of different ways to study that. And the third one, this is kind of our optimism versus pessimism, I think. So we're going to be doing I ordered by ... We'll say darkest to lightest. And lightest to darkest. Okay, awesome. Let's actually go back to trial 2. Yeah, I forgot to change the variable values here. So this one is going to be Earth. And this one's going to be sun. Then we'll click change this one. We'll just call it dark and light. You can also just change them all to option A, option B. And as long as you've coded them in your head, that like you know which one's which, you're all set. All right, awesome. So I'm going to show you how to hide this question and make it visible only after a certain number of seconds, because that's also a cool feature that we can do. So let's add an event here. We're going to call this show question 2, or just show Q2. The trigger is going to be frame start. Okay. And the action is actually going to be a control action, and we're going to make it a delayed action. So the trigger is still frame start. So this event technically starts when the frame starts, except that it's going to be delayed by 6 seconds, because that's about how long it took me to sort the question and really think about it. So we'll do 6 seconds, and the action is going to be an object action. We're going to set an object property. Our target is order. And what we're going to change is its visibility. Click the pen icon, go to constant value, numeric, and click 1. Let me explain what I just did here. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back through and edit that second multiple choice question to be invisible. And then after 6 seconds, I actually want it to become visible. So when the participant first sees that question, they sort them in whatever order they like without really thinking about the order. And then once it's sorted, after about 6 seconds, then they see that question and go, oh, wow, how did I sort those? So very interesting here. All right. So once that question is visible, we'll click finish. Perfect. So now I need to go into here and actually change this visibility to 0. So our question's gone now, but it will become visible after the 6 seconds that we set. Finally, let's add our last event here, and that just moves us between the trials. We're just going to call this one next trial. The trigger is going to be variable value changed on order, right? So they see the sorting question, they sort for 6 seconds, then the multiple choice question appears, and then once they click an answer for that, we're going to jump to the next trial. So everything's pretty streamlined here. Jump to next trial and click finish. All right, so there's our sorting task. I just wanted to show you that object because I feel like it's a little underutilized and it's super cool. and also the fact that you can show or hide questions with time delays. You can even do it with variable delays as well. So, very, very cool here. Let's go back to our study design and make sure we've added it to our block. All right. So it looks like I've got just a few more minutes here. So in these last few minutes, I'm actually going to show you how to use data frames, which is one of our newer features. So I'm going to add a data frames task. And in this data frames task, I'm also going to show you a cool way to troubleshoot if, say, you're getting a blank screen or something just isn't showing up for you. All right, so in this data frames task, I'm just going to be adding an image to a frame and just displaying the image, but I'm going to show you how to do that from a data frame. So let's just add an image to our default frame here. All right, plain and simple. I'm going to make the duration just, we'll do 1.5 seconds. How's that? Okay, and I'm going to hide the mouse because for this task, I'm just presenting a stream of images. Now to start editing our data frame, we're going to go in the Variables tab, and we're going to add a new variable. And I'm just going to call this data frame 1. In format, I'm changing this to data frame. If you notice, all of my options went away here because data frames are basically Excel sheets of you can have values, you can have letters, or you can have files. When you upload a CSV here, if you have any file names, they won't be connected to actual files like images. You have to do that part manually. And I'll show you how to do that here. So this is going to be my column of files. So I'm going to rename my column just images. This is a very basic data frames overview. We have a lot more on our YouTube page. There's, I think, 2 or 3 videos about this. So to add my files to my images frame, I'm going to click that file icon and just select a bunch of these random clip art images that I have hanging out on my computer. And click OK. Awesome. So now I have my 7 images added to my data frame. They're just hanging out, and click OK. All right. Big thing. I don't want this to reset at trial start. My data frame variable is basically just an Excel sheet that's holding my images. So I don't want that to reset. So we'll click OK. If you can see here, it says unused. That means I haven't really done anything with it. We're about to do something with it. So let's add an event that's going to actually shuffle the data frame. So they won't all appear in that same order. I'm actually going to shuffle them a little bit, and then they're going to be presented to the participant. So let's start a new frame event. I'm going to call this show image. My trigger is going to be frame start. This is like the most unfancy way of showing you a fancy feature, so easy stuff. The first thing is going to be a data frame operation, and I want to shuffle the data frame entries. Here, you get this green button. Whenever you see a green button, it usually means it's referring to a variable. So I'm going to click this and add my data frame, and click OK. And I'm going to shuffle by row. I only have 1 column, so shuffling by column wouldn't really do anything. Shuffling by row would. So it's going to shuffle the entries, and then what it's going to do is we're going to select from the data frame. And this is super complicated. So this involves having an index variable and an output, and then assigning it to the image. So this is one way to do it. You totally could. I'm actually not going to do it this way, though. I'm going to do it a more simple way. We're just going to set the object property, which is my image, scroll down to file data, and then we're going to select the value from the data frame. It prompts me immediately to select my data frame as my variable. My row is going to be that randomly determined one, but because I shuffled it, I'm actually going to choose by trial number. Let me set this up and then I'll explain it in a second. Okay, so what it's doing is on frame start, it's shuffling the data frame. So those 1 through 7 images are all getting shuffled here. And then once it's shuffled, it's going to pick an image. The row is going to be the trial number. So the images have been shuffled. So trial 1 is going to be whatever image ends up in that row 1. Okay, and so on and so forth. Since I only have 1 column, it's just a constant value of 1 because I just have the 1 column. All right, awesome. You can also select this button to record when this change is reflected on the screen. So that's super helpful. So just milliseconds from frame onset when that image actually shows. Okay, everything looks pretty good here. And click Finish. And then Save. Now remember I said 7 images in my data frame, so let's change the number of trials to 7. And click Save. Now quickly, I'm going to show you a way to troubleshoot if, say, I run this task and everything just ends up blank, like we're not really seeing anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a text object here. There's not really going to be any text in it, but there is going to be a variable in it. My variable is actually going to be a new variable, but I'm going to show you how to set that up real quick before I add the text object. Okay, so we're going to show image here. This is like a big long event. So I'm actually going to add to this event. So I'm going to open the event window again, and I'm going to add another action at the end here, and it's going to be set record variable. Okay, bear with me here. So I'm creating a new variable, and this is just going to be image shown. Okay, it's going to be string. It's going to reset at trial start. So click OK with this. Image shown is literally just going to be the object property of the image, and it's going to be file name. So I just want to know the name of the image that ends up getting shown on the screen, and click Finish. So I added all of this to one big event. You can actually have this as a separate event. This technique right here is actually a troubleshooting technique for when your frame is just blank, nothing's showing up. What you can do is just either grab the variable you already have set or create a new variable that's just going to show you, hey, this is what's being printed out, or this is what the program is wanting to read. So let's go back to our text object here. And all I'm doing is just adding that image shown variable to the text. So now when the image is presented, the file name of the image that was picked should show up down here. So if the screen is blank and the text is blank, that means that variable isn't actually being used or read correctly. You should be able to see that both of them match. So let's click Save. Everything looks good. Let's do a test run here. Data frames are relatively new, so we're updating it, we're finding new use cases. So it's a pretty exciting thing actually. So I should just see, yep, just a stream of images. And if you look down in the corner, there's my text showing me which image was picked. Perfect. All right. So the reason I used a data frame is because it's actually a lot more organized, I think, than just selecting this image, grabbing a bunch of files here. This way you can just upload a whole stream of like your values, and it's all stored pretty safely there. And click Save. All right. So I'm actually not going to add this one to our main block because it's just kind of a test of data frames. So let's build quickly our last task, and this is just going to be our thank you task because this is the end of our sample study. So the last task here, we want to add a text object, pop it right in the center, and thank you for participating. You always want to have some sort of welcome frame and some sort of end frame, because just starting and stopping in the middle of a study is kind of jarring for participants. And let's say I want to ask one more question here. We'll say, please indicate your email or something like that. And all I'm going to do is add another input object for email. Pop it right here. And I can actually hide the question header here because I already asked them for their email. Just remember to change your input type to text. Just leaves that box there. And then let's add a button to end the experiment. I'm just going to call it end. So we'll add our last event here. We'll just call it end. The trigger is going to be a mouse trigger on that last button. Click next. And we're going to use a jump action, but there's actually a special jump action for ending the experiment. It's just called end session. and it makes sure that everything gets recorded. So clicking this button, they exit out, we're all set. And click Save. Make sure we've added it to our block. And we're all set, except there's one more feature I want to show you. It's the randomization separator. With this, I can actually add these bars that will randomize tasks within them within the same block, which is super fun because it means my intro task will always show at the beginning. My end task is always at the end, but these 3 tasks in the middle could appear in a random order, all different for each participant. So it's really cool if you have, say, a quick short experiment and you just want to randomize 1 or 2 things. All right. So there's our test study. I hope that helped showcase a lot of the features of Labvanced for you guys. Is there any questions about anything I did? Does anyone want to see something again? Looks pretty good? Okay. All right. So let me jump back to my slides here. Okay. So quickly before we get into the question and answer session, I'd like to talk about this really special opportunity that we have with Insight. Um, Thank you. Yes, I can do more webinars if you'd like. Um, so this special opportunity that we have, this is a job opportunity. It's a freelance position and it's part-time, but we would like you to be able to work in the European CET time zone. And it's actually with a different company than us, but we're partnering with them, so we're helping out. What we're looking for is a talented Labvanced user who can create cognitive tests for doctors and other people working in the health industry. So you'll be using Labvanced to create these tests that are going to help the mission of advancing online healthcare. We'd like you to already be very knowledgeable of Labvanced, and please contact us. You can email us, reach out in the support chat. Don't reach out here because this is a public chat. But definitely contact us if this is something that would interest you. It's a really great opportunity. I mean, I know for me, Labvanced has been really, really great. Because of COVID, actually, my own research projects were on hold, and using Labvanced allowed me to continue my research and not have to table all my products. So, very, very helpful company. If you like using it, feel free to reach out to us about this opportunity because this may be really great for you. All right, so here's the question and answer portion. We have about 30 minutes for this portion. I've also linked our social media here if you'd like to follow us. And if you have something very specific, definitely reach out via the support chat because we can schedule a call with you. But if anyone has any questions, please pop in the chat and I can answer them now. If everything looks good, if you have any comments or feedback, that'd be great too. Thank you guys. All right. Doesn't look like we have any big questions, so. I can actually go back and show you. What I'm going to do at the end here is I'm actually going to participate, have you participate and publish in a more complete version of the sample webinar study that we just built with a little bit more features. So that'll be published in the Labvanced library in a bit. So you can participate in that if you liked it. Can Labvanced read my Excel sheet that I've already created for data frames? Yes, as long as it's not file names. If you already have an Excel sheet with maybe just like string or numbers, yes, you can go ahead and plug that in. There's an option here. I can actually show you that really quickly. With data frames. Yep. So right here, you can click Upload CSV data. And if you have any CSVs that you want Labvanced to read, you can just pop it right there. So that's super helpful, yes. Yes. This video should be available afterwards, yes. Yeah, of course. Yeah, feel free to show this to any of your colleagues. It should be up. It takes a couple minutes to like fully upload to YouTube and everything. But yes, it should be all set. I think YouTube is probably the easiest platform to upload it on, but it should be streaming to our LinkedIn and our Facebook as well. All right. Any other big questions? Don't be shy. I'm totally here to just help you guys. That's my whole purpose today. So anything you need. Everything look pretty good? All right. If everything looks good, I can go ahead. Oh, okay. There's one more question here. Can you make a study collaborative? Yes. If you have a lab license, you can. So for free users, your studies are kind of your own. You're just making it on your account. Each license has different limitations and different accessibility options. Thank you. So yes, if you have a lab license, you can share within people in your lab. Yeah, and that's when you're like sharing a study, you can just click like add user on the side. Yeah, highly recommend getting the big license because it helps so much when you can just send studies back and forth and edit each other's. It's very nice. So thank you. Yeah. Thank you guys for watching this. I'm glad that this is helpful. We can do more in the future if you guys would like more features, like maybe we can do an eye tracking one or like a bigger, much more complicated one. But until then, we have great videos on YouTube that you can go ahead and check out too. All right. If that's everything, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. But thank you so much for watching. That was super fun for me as well. So don't be afraid to reach out. Anything you need, just let me know. All right. I'll go ahead and sign off then. Thank you guys so much.